I'm going to start with the homework review for today. Mental math patterns, patterns and multiples. I'm going to go over these answers. If you feel like you're struggling still after I review it, then we can work together, and I might need to make an instructional video that can help you some more. When you look at these sorts of problems, you want to first identify the whole number in it, because we're simply just going to think about this first as 9 times 3. 9 times 3 is 27, but notice it's not 9 times 3. It's times 300. 300, that means we have to shift the place value 2 more spots to make it 2700. And just to model this, when I'm doing 9 times 3, I wind up with 27. But it's not 9 times 3, it's 9 times 300. So essentially we're multiplying by 100, and we have to shift 2 more spots. So the 2 would be here and the 7 here, because that 2 zeros represents times 100. So a lot of people are just looking at the zeros as placeholders and thinking, oh, 300 has a 9 and a 3 is 27, and then we need to stretch it out to make it 100 times bigger by writing down 2 additional zeros there. I'm hesitant to say adding zeros because we're not really adding, we're shifting on the place value chart. Give yourself a star for number 1 if you get it. Number 2, 1 times 3 is 3, but it's 100 times bigger, so 300. I'm going to think 6 times 5 is 30, but it's not 6, it's 60. So the answer here is actually 300. Doing the best I can with handwriting. Number 4, 5 times 7 is 35. Of course, that's not 7, it's 7,000. So I have to stretch this out 1,000 times bigger. The answer is 35,000. In this case, I could look at it as 1 times 4, but I'm going to look at it as 10 times 4 and say 40. And then I don't need to worry about stretching it out on the 10 side anymore because I already multiplied 10 times 4. But I do have to stretch it out 1,000 times bigger, times 10, times 100, times 1,000. The answer is 40,000. 40 and 3 additional zeros, or 4 and 4 zeros. In this case, notice I'm going to first think about it as just 7 times 2. 7 times 2 is 14. But in this case, it's not 7, it's 700. So I have to stretch this side out 100 times bigger. And the other side I have to stretch out, it's not 2, it's 200. So I have to stretch out 100 times bigger. So I get 14 with 4 zeros, read as 140,000. I'll do number 7. I have 18. And once you get the hang of it, you realize I'm going to have 4 zeros. I'm stretching out times 10 and times 1,000, so 180,000. In this case, I'm just going to look at it as 1 times 10 is 10, but it's not 1, it's 1,000, so I'm going to stretch it out 1,000 times bigger. The answer is 10,000. Number 9, I'm going to look at the 5 times the 3 is 15. Although it's not 5, it's 5,000, so I'm going to need to stretch this out 1,000 times, and it's not 3, of course, it's 3,000. So it's 15 with 4 zeros, read as 150,000. Notice how when I put the comma in, I start in the ones place, and I group them in groups of 3. I'm going to look at the whole numbers. 6 times 8 is 48. And I need to stretch that 6 out 1,000 times bigger, and that 8 out 10 times bigger. So I wind up with 480,000. Looking at number 11, 9 times 4 is 36. Of course, it's not 4. It's 40, so I'm going to increase that 10 times, and then I'm going to need to increase it 1,000 times bigger. 360,000. 7 times 2 is 14. Make it 100 times bigger. 6 times 6 is 36. But I need to make this 100 times bigger. And then 10 times bigger. 36,000. 14, I'm going to do 1 times 6 is 6. Make it 100 times bigger. And also make it another 100 times bigger. So I wind up with 60,000. 15, I'm going to do 2 times 5 is 10. But it's not 2, it's 200, so I'm going to make it 100 times bigger. And it's not 5, it's 500, so I'm going to have to make it 100 times bigger again. I wind up with 100,000. Altogether, that part is worth 15 points. So you can score yourself out of 15. Numbers 16, 17, and 18 are a little bit different. 16 is like what we just did. So when I look at 7 times 5, I wind up with 35. Make it 100 times bigger, then make it 1,000 times bigger. Groups of 3, 3,500,000, or 35 with 5 zeros. Now this problem is a little bit different because if I want to think about what number times 2, let's say, equals 90. Let's say now I'm thinking about working in reverse. So what number times 2 is 90? Well, I know 45 times 2 is 90. So that's how I get the 90. But I also need these 3 additional zeros. I can look at this 2 and say, oh, it's not 2, it's 20. So that gives me 1 additional zero. But I still need to make it 100 times bigger. I can't change the 20, but I can make the 45 100 times bigger. The answer is 4,500, or 45 with 2 zeros. Little trickier. We're going to look at that again on 18. Remember, when you multiply, we're just going to start by looking. Let me just switch my pen color here. We're just going to start by looking at that whole number. 6 times what number will give me 12? Well, I know 6 times 2 is 12. But I also know that it's not 12, it's 1,200. So I need to stretch this out 100 times. Well, I can look at the 6 and say, oh, it's already stretched out 100 times. It's just 600 times 2. I don't need to adjust the 2 at all. That's 3 additional points. So far, it's worth 18 points on the sheet. There are 2 additional questions. Number 18, one colony has about 8,000 nests. Let me get back on my pen. One colony has about 8,000 nests. If 3 penguins occupy each nest, how many penguins are in all? I need to set up that problem as 8,000 times 3. 1 point if you wrote this expression recognizing, or turned it into equation, recognizing you need to multiply 8,000 times 3. 8,000 times 3, I'm going to look at the 8 times 3 and say that's 24, but I'm going to need to stretch it out 1,000 times more. The answer is 24,000. Use multiplication there, not division. Number 20, each pair of macaroni penguins lays, now that's a typo, it should say lays 2 eggs. So each pair lays 2 eggs. How many eggs do 12 million pairs of penguins lay? Well, each pair lays 2 eggs. So how many eggs do 12 million pairs? I'm going to need to say 12 million. If each pair lays 2 eggs and there are 12 million pairs, I'm going to have to multiply that by 2. And I will get 24 million. All right. Actually, let's just go ahead to make the scoring simpler. Count each one worth 1 point. Even number 19, which I previously said was 2, and make the whole sheet out of 20 points. Write your score out of 20 as a fraction at the top of the paper on the front side, and then submit it. And if you need additional support, we can work together on that.